Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Good evening. Good evening. Happy Thursday to you all. Welcome to the Erudition Network. This is the Erudition Network Interactive Black History and Knowledge Session. I am your host for this next hour or so, Eddie Phillips. If you are new to this show, this program is dedicated to talking and teaching Black history and providing knowledge and information that you may not have picked up or been taught in school. And so we come on there, or I come on, I always say we come on every Thursday to interact with you, to have a conversation with you, to encourage you to share this program with others as we go out and we talk about history and its effects on our modern time. It's interactive, so we allow you to interact and ask questions in real time to get information. I am a public historian, so I sit here for this hour and we just hit history and try to spend time trying to learn together. I thank all of you who will be joining us live, those of you who will watch the after recording, for joining us. You know, one of the things that I said to myself this week was that I'm going to start being so hard on myself, or as difficult in trying to expect that everybody is going to respond history in the way that I do. It's an unfair um, thing to do, and so I've been trying lately to just, though I tell people, you know, prioritize your history, prioritize your history. That is not a threat. That is a reminder. I posted that on one of my social media pages over the last week or so. That is not a threat. That is a reminder. We must know our history and we must do a better job at sharing it and growing it within our own community, family, and around. If you're here and joining us live, please feel free to chime in on the chat. Whether you're joining us on YouTube or whether you're joining us on Facebook. I see my wife is on. Good to see you, baby. Thank you for being here. I really want you to learn, and I want you, you know, as we go through all of the things that we're seeing nowadays, it is so important that we really reflect on our history. You know, there's so many things that are out here that have been put out here that are incorrect, you know, and sometimes you even as someone who has a good grounding in history, something will happen that will jar you. I was sitting with my wife earlier today, and it came up that this is um, the what is the 60th anniversary of Freedom Summer, and I was like, it was hard for me to tell. I was like, I thought that was last year, but last year was not it. I know what my mind went through. It went through to 1963. Um, it went into the idea of the 100-year anniversary of things. And but when you really think about 1964, and the way connection to that for me was I started to think about Malcolm X's uh, the I'm tongue tied now. The Ballot of the Bullet, right? Um, because Malcolm, in the beginning of that speech, he talks about the issues with Freedom Summer. He talks about what was going on in the South, and he talked about how it would probably be the most explosive year America had ever witnessed, right? Because through that time, you started to see all of these different changes, and people really started to show how much they hated the idea, murderously, I might add. They hated the idea um, of peace, of civil rights, of coming together, right? And so it when you look at that, you start to realize 60 years is not a long time. 60 years is not a long time, right? And when you understand that it's not a long time, you understand how Freedom Summer, where people were being assaulted at counters and people were being pulled off of public transportation, where civil rights workers were being killed, um, you start to realize just how crazy it is. And you start to see people realize that this is a big deal. This is a big deal because we're losing a lot of the things that people fought so hard for 60 years ago. We're actually kind of falling backwards in a lot of respects. And unfortunately, the non reverence of realizing, rather it be because we could all do it, we disassociate, we don't think about it. Um, it's still a fact that we have to understand our history and we have to do better about remembering it and applying its lessons to our current life and to who we are. So, if you're new, if you watch this as a replay, I want you to understand that that's what this is about. That is why I take the time out every Thursday evening, despite my schedule, despite the things that I have going on, despite whatever is happening in my life. I try my best, hurt or not, to get on Erudition and present you with information and with facts and trying to get you to prioritize your historical understanding so that you may grow from it, and also encourage you to share. One of the things that I have decided, I was telling my son recently, is that I know we're going to get better about our advertisement for what we do, because we have to. We have to get better about putting this out here, not just to the people that we know, but to those who are out there who are completely oblivious to the fact of what we're doing in this network. And so that is one of my obligations and one of my things that I am definitely working on right now, because I want us to grow further. And I want it to be that when we come on, we are always presented with new and challenging information. We are always being confronted with people with diverse views who bring up things that they may have heard that may be right or wrong. And so that we can talk about them and educate the public. Because if we can do that, um, we will be a better people. We will be a better country. We will have a better understanding of each other and who we are. Because I do believe um, a lot of times we're not doing that. We're not seeing the connections. And so I want us to do better. Um, I see there's a question there, Tina. I'm gonna open up for questions in just a moment. What I'm doing right now is I'm not trying to give people time to come on, people to connect with us. Um, but I definitely want you all, whoever watches this, if you don't watch us with the live, share, because we need your help in growing. And wherever you share, you don't know who you may share it with, who may click upon it and find something that they needed to hear. So I encourage you um, to do that for us today. All right. Usually, what this program, as my wife was already getting to, is I try to um, open up the floor to discussion, where we can actually have a discussion and people can ask questions. And so I'm going to do that now. I'm going to make sure that we can. I don't know why I can't see my brand. There it is. Open up that so that we can have open up to your all's questions with anyone who is live that you may have. And I saw that Tina, you had asked a question. Can you tell us a bit of history about it, why abortion exists and why IVF came about as it pertains to women? Well, that's a very complex, complex history. Majority of it really, and there's some hot spots there. What I can tell you um, is that we went through a period of time, right, um, of criminalizing abortion. In the early days of the United States, it wasn't really illegal um, for you to abort a baby, right? Um, there was a thing in the law that was called quickening, right? There was a thing in the law where um, when you first felt uh, the baby move, right? Um, that it was protected, or it was something that you could not um, abort legally per se. Um, but then, with the formation of many associations in the 19th century, and you have to also we have to also understand something. You don't want to make something very illegal when you have a country of slaves that you routinely, um, and I'm trying to find the most equitable word here, but basically who you routinely scoped, right? Who you population control. So the aborting of babies, the killing of babies, in slavery was something that was done and predominantly ignored. And so you don't want to put laws in that would prohibit you from doing something that you felt was better for your plantation or for the country. So that was that issue. But coming towards the end of the 1800s, coming into the beginning of the 1900s, around 1850s, 1840s, you had the formation of many medical associations, predominantly the American Medical Association, right, which is male dominated. And you started to see the phasing out of what was known at the time, early during the time, and had been part of the country from the beginning, of the midwives and the nurses being involved in having these babies. And so around this time in the 1850s, the medical association started to ban and criminalize abortion, and they passed state laws to stop women from being able to abort. Now, this is important because you have to understand also that this was leading into changes within the country. And so by the end of slavery and by the beginning of the 1900s, around 1880, 1890, you saw restrictions on abortion. You saw a lot of abortion laws through many of the states. And by the time of the 1920s, it was illegal for you to abort a baby in every state, no matter what the level of pregnancy was. So that meant as soon as you knew you were pregnant, the quickening or whatever, they were told that they could not abort the baby. So understanding that history of it, but also understanding why it was that way and what led to it is important. Now, things change as we start to get into eugenics and things like that, because now we start to wonder, well, we wanted to make sure that we were having these babies, right? And that we could have them. And so things started to change. Things started to change. So people started to scoff law, ignore the law, the abortion law that had been passed. And so by the time you got to the 1940s, 50s, and even into the 60s, you started to see a lot of unsafe, illegal abortions, which a lot of women were dying, right? A lot of women were dying. It is argued that thousands of women across the country were dying, right? As a result of failed abortions done by, picked up off the street wannabe doctors. And so coming out of the roaring 20s, coming into the 30s, the 40s, and the 50s, and the 60s, free love, you started to see this idea that there had to be something done for it. And that's when you started to see things like Planned Parenthood and things like that that came into place. And by the 70s, right, by the time that I was born, you had Roe versus Wade. And that established the legal right to access abortion nationwide, legally and medically in hospitals, to basically stop the death of a lot of women. Now, when we talk about where we are now, of course, we had the whole Dobbs versus Jackson and the overturning of Roe versus Wade, and where we are politically in the country. And I will tell you that historically, it is always motivated by population and what people want to accomplish with the population. A lot of the rhetoric that we hear is very much trumped by alt-right groups, replacement theory advocates who feel that the allowance of abortion has reduced the amount of whites within the country and throughout the world. And so that attitude has led us to a reformation, so to speak, on what we do as far as Roe versus Wade, as far as how we repealed it and how we now look at it. It is very much dominated by those on that sector, and it is to a point where they don't want to even allow women to have the right to make a choice for themselves. Now, IVF is an entirely different thing, and unfortunately, I'm not as informed with IVF as I am on history of abortion. But what I will tell you is that it all falls within the same place, right? On the only issue many people have with IVF is what embryos you're getting rid of. That is the main argument that is made. It is not the idea of creating life. It is the fact of, okay, so many of these cells were created, and so now what are we going to do with them? Right? What are we going to do with them? And if we can't fertilize this woman with all of these, then they feel it is a waste. But it is pretty ignorant in that idea, because the female and the male body are constantly creating eggs and sperms to create life. And whatever is not utilized, the body will dispose of. So there is always a disposal mechanism that is happening. But they feel that the creation of any type of life and then a waste of it. So there's argument there. And so we get back into the debate. But when it really comes down to, is it unsafe? Is it illegal for us to decide, who lives and who dies? And when we are not the people who carry the life. So that's really an issue. Well, that is true. It is a science that said people could wait and they can, or when people needed help in creating life, um, it was there for them. I don't see anything wrong with either of those things, but I do see how historically it has been manipulated and by what groups it has been manipulated by. And so we have to understand the radical, racist, bigoted um, groups who have a stake in this only in the idea that they feel like they are being replaced, that they are being overrun. So you do have those situations that are going on. I am going to quickly, if you all will pardon me, while I'm talking to you, um, I gotta fix a little error that popped on my screen. But today is a very good question. It was something that, there is historical, uh, connotation to it, and definitely something that I think people should look, um, and you should go and look up for yourself and get a better understanding of before you go out and just start spitting out rhetoric that you hear from someone else. It would be just a good idea um, on it to just look it up. It's a big thing right now. Do some research, not quick research, research. Because I tell you, if you do that, you're gonna know what you're talking about, and you're gonna feel a lot better about it, right? You're gonna feel a lot better about it because you're gonna feel like, okay, now I know the positives and the pros and the cons, right? And even if I am wrong in some of my assertions that I get from the information or the data, at least when I bring it up with people and we discuss it, we'll be discussing it from an educated perspective and not from a perspective of bias, not from a perspective of sophistry, right? And so I think if we do that, um, again, this comes down to the debate, to what we're doing and who we are and what we want to provide to people. But that was a great question. I appreciate your question. If there are no other questions tonight, I wanted to get into something tonight. Goes along with our questions. I try to bring up what some of you all send me. I was trying to bring that up um, in chat and all over. I get a lot of um, and I appreciate everyone that does it. Please continue to do that. I would prefer that you do it on the sessions live, and I would like to see you get on the Erudition Network's Facebook page or our website or whatever and do it. But I understand everyone doesn't like to see what they're posting, and they want to make it a chat, especially today when everybody's so afraid of being judged. But um, I was presented with some information this week that I didn't agree with, and the person who sent it to me, um, I'm not gonna expose their name, but I was told it's a minister in the church, a predominant um, organization, who sent me a thing and said that I should, I guess from one of my shows, I should understand that Muslims hate Christians and that Muslims have done just as much evil as Christians have in the world, and that their convert or die approach in ancient times and even to some extent today, show that they really don't care for Africans or blacks. He said much more than that, and it started to kind of go off the rails. But I felt that it was a point to be made here. Um, as many of you know who watch the program, um, I'm writing a second part to my book, my first book. And if you have not gotten this book, I ask you to go out and get it. 101 Black History Question Challenge, Early World. You can get it on Amazon. Let's pull it up. If you just type in Erudition Network Presents, you will see it. It's written by me, but you can get it on Amazon. You can get it on Lulu Books. But what I tried to do in that book was I tried to explain early world Africa, and because Africa is the place of life where humans come from. And I tried to go through the origins and everything else. But this second book, what I'm doing is I'm talking about the Middle Ages and how Africans influenced the world during what is called the Dark Ages, what is called the Middle Ages, and how they assisted the world. There were many, many kingdoms during that time, right? Many caliphates, many empires, not just Egypt, not just Ethiopia. During this period of 500 BCE to 1500 BC, we can look at it. You can see Zimbabwe, you can see Benin, you can see Ghana, you can see Mali. So many empires, the Nok culture, which I talk about in this first book. All of these cultures played a part. And Africa and the Middle East, as we call it now, on the other side of the Red Sea, were connected. They were connected. They operated with each other. So if you look at the Persian Empire and its association with Egypt or with Kush or with Uxum, or you start to understand that the world in Africa was huge, bigger than what was being offered in Europe. But we always focus on Europe and the Romans and the Roman Empire and what became a post-Roman Empire and these kingdoms that came up. But we forget. We forget. And we let historians lie to us. Some of the most academic people on the planet at the time resided in Africa. And so when we start talking about God, because this is really what this is, when we start talking about God as this religious leader did, we forget a very important part. Muslims did not hate the Christian. The Muslims did not hate the Jew. The Muslims did not hate these other cultures. As a matter of fact, if you were to go look at it, you will find that Muhammad, right? Muhammad, who lived from 570, you could fact check me later. So I was watching the debates. 570 to 600 something BCE. Oh, sorry, Common Era. Hey, Mike, you kind of threw me off, man. I was in my mind. Good to see you, brother. But anyway, when Muhammad died, right, that's an important point because the spread of Islam that went all over Africa was not a negative thing. Africans didn't see it as a negative thing. It wasn't, we're going to cut your head off if you don't practice Islam. It had already spread through most of Northern Africa. Oh, no, Mike, you're good. You're good, man. My mind, I was in my head trying to get those years right. It's not always an easy thing for a historian when you're trying to get them years right. But I just want you to understand that it had already started to migrate. And it was migrating because of trade. It was migrating because people needed goods, because all of these kingdoms, right, needed to send information and send goods. And with those goods went information. Islam taught a lot of Africans how to read and how to write. It taught them things that went alongside, right, their own beliefs. People like to say that the African believed in multiple gods. The African wasn't always that's not the case. The fact is, Islam spread in the way that it spread in the Middle Ages because it was beneficial both for profit, for merchandise, for kingdom, to be able to interact with these Muslim cultures. And when you teach people a language, or you teach them to write, or you teach them how to do math, when you teach them these things, they grow. They grow because now they have a way to grow their own individual kingdoms. Now, that's not to say that Christianity did not spread. Of course, we had Christianity. There was Christianity in Nubia. There was Christianity in Ethiopia. We know that this existed. But here's the thing. We also know that the Romans and post-Roman empires co-opted the idea of Christianity. And it was looked at as an oppressive regime, not coming in to help you to be a better culture of your own, not giving you the tools to grow your own society, but more so being directed by Europeans in a way that it became oppressive. And we know this because in the Middle Ages, we start to see all of these crusades to go back into the religious lands and take and take and take. But when we don't teach this in our churches, when we teach our people to dislike and hate and see Muslims and other religions as something that is wrong, and never look at the history of it, never understand why did so many Africans accept that, and then not to see how it's affecting us today. Today, we have Israel bombing Muslim nations and Muslim nations bombing Israel. Today, we have a divide still within the world, in the country. We're so quick to say, I support Israel, without the identifier of what are you supporting about Israel? Or I support Palestinians, without understanding what are you supporting about the Palestinian? What do you know of their history? What do you know of their background? What do you know about the Sunni and the Shia? What do you know, Muslims? What is the difference here? When you sit and you say to yourself that Muslims hate Christians, Muslims hate Jews, Muslims hate, you don't know any of that. You've isolated yourself into a belief system that is going to affect how you interact with anyone who is different from you. I will tell you, from being all over this world and being over in Middle Eastern countries and interacting with people. And I remember being over there and a man told me, you know what, Eddie? We were told to love Christians, he's Muslim, as brothers. You are brothers. We don't have to share the same belief, but you are brothers. But somehow, and I see preachers in churches, online, demonizing Muslims, demonizing them. And so they view Americans as hypocrites. They view them as hypocrites. How can you work with anyone if you have the belief, as this preacher sent to me, that they were convert or die? Either you're a Muslim or you're dead. Now, there are parts of Muslim history that are violent, just like there are parts of Christian history that are violent. Because if you believe that the Crusades, the Inquisition, if you believe that any of that was healthy, loving Christians, then you're wrong. You know, in the early Muslims' rule of a lot of different areas and their interaction in their kingdoms, right? They had a status for people. They legally created a status for people who were non-Muslim, who were Jewish, Hindu. If you lived in their territories, they granted you protection as brothers. Now, they also had what was called a jizya, a tax. A tax. That tax allowed you to practice your religion, right? Run your own community, live your own way by your own beliefs. But it is no different than any other ancient community. Rather, you're talking about the Romans, the Mongols, all of them, a lot of them, they allowed you to practice these religions. But we act like hypocrites. As you just said, Mike, hypocrites, liars. We tell ourselves that what we're doing is right because, as they said during the Crusades, and as I put on here last week, God wills it. God wills it. And who are you to dictate the will of God? Who are you to tell anyone outside of whatever direction that God gave you, to tell anyone that they don't have the right? But we did it. But we have done it. And I don't know I don't know any other better way to break it down for you tonight. Because it is this type of division and hatred and lack of historical understanding that is pushing a lot of us to do some very, very atrocious things. To not receive people as brothers. And because we don't do that, who is really practicing the convert or die mentality? All religions are looking for converts. All religions are trying to debate with you and pull at the soul to follow whatever it is that they're offering, rather that be the Christian, rather that be the Muslim, rather that be the Hindu, rather that be the Jew. They're all going to do that. But as I remember being told when I was overseas by a friend of mine, there the Quran, which I know the Christians, you probably go, oh, you read the Quran. You should read everything to understand what you think you're going to be arguing against. But the Quran tells you that you're not compelled in religion. I paraphrase. There is no compulsion. You're not compelled to do anything in religion. Facts stand out clear from error. That stayed with me. There's no compulsion. You're not compelled. You should not be compelled in religion. The facts should stand out beyond all error. And what does that mean? What did that mean? That meant what he was trying to convey to me is the fact is that God, whatever term you put him in, wants us all to love each other, to work with each other, to treat each other with kindness and fairness, and as brothers and sisters in humanity, because that's what we are. We are family. But we've been led astray, pulled in, told lies, and we attack each other for no reason. And so when I got that response, I said I would definitely do a show on it, and I would definitely push the idea, right, that this is a lie. My phone. This is a lie. And where do these lies come from? That should always be the first question people always ask. Who created the lie? Well, some of these lies about Muslim life, about Christian antagonism with Muslim life, really came up during the Crusades and European Christianity. And it really came because people saw folks as different. The Moors who came into Italy and influenced Europe during the Middle Ages, during the Dark Ages, it became a negative thing, a racist belief later on to push them out. And so in order to justify brutal and murderous campaigns to the Holy Lands, sovereigns, leaders, kings, they decided to tell this lie that Muslims were killing Christians. That Muslims were killing Christians, and that this was a common thing. So now we have to rally up the truth because God wills us to go liberate Jerusalem. Take it back. Even though the Islamic people in the Middle East were allowing people to practice their religion. And we're not killing people in a way that the rhetoric of these leaders of this religious propaganda, even coming from the Catholic Roman Church, this was the push. And so in order to expand into Muslim territories, you needed to push this lie. In order to travel through Muslim territories in Africa and Asia, you needed to push this lie. And we still perpetuate this lie. And even when we know that there were things that were done, I'm going to give my best example of why horrendous things happen in history, not to justify it, but to give you the factual connotation as to why it happened. One of the things that we know went on was that there were occasionally violent reactions by radicalized Muslims, just as you had radicalized Christians. And so in certain places in history, right, different caliphates, different things in the Middle East, different things in Africa, we saw that there were people who, in fact, did kill people um, before conversion. It would be no different than when you look at the Inquisition or something like that. But the example that I often try to use for people with history is the indigenous people of Americas. When we were kids, we were told that the indigenous people scalped pioneers. This is what we were told. That they went out and they killed and they savaged um, early Americans as they traveled west. But what we're not told is that long before any of that happened, they were putting prices on heads of indigenous people. And that miscreants, murderous, evil men would ride into communities, Indian communities, and they would murder them. And most of the time, when we look at the history of it, it was when the hunters, gatherers, and warriors would not be there. And they would sell these scalps at town for money. We know this to be the fact. There are multiple, many examples of it in American history. But what we hear, what has been left with us, is the idea of the Indian scalping. You never hear the idea of a white man or a pioneer scalping. You don't hear that. What you hear is the indigenous people did it. They scalped them. And fact is that we know from all other history, from Lewis and Clark, from the first arrival of the Pilgrims here, and many other accounts, that Native Americans, indigenous people, welcomed folks here. People who stole from them when they first arrived. I've told you guys the story of the Pilgrims when they first got here, and the first thing they did was theft. But they helped these people. Desecration and theft. They went to graves of Indians who had been buried due to disease. And what they did was they stole the honorariums that were near their graves and tombs and places of honor. And they wrote about it. They documented it from their own words because they said they didn't know what it was. My point to you is, when you do things to people and you radicalize them, you show them that you are just as brutal or savage and as cruel. Radicalization takes people outside of the idea of natural thought. A lot of times they just want revenge. They want to get back what you took from them equally. An eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. And so when we see this situation with the caliphates and things that happen in Muslim history, we know that a lot of it was also because of the oppressions and things that they saw. So they decided they would do the same. We cannot ignore the complexity, the diversity, the difference that every person has and how they look at things. But we can't come up and act like a monolith as people in the church or people who tell others that I don't even want to talk to a Muslim because I know what they're about. It's foolery. Foolery that has led to too much lost life, too many people hurt and killed. And I definitely wanted to go into that tonight. I definitely wanted to do that because I truly believe that right now, what we're facing, the rhetoric that we're hearing, is not productive. It is not helpful, and it is going to get people hurt, both abroad and within our own country. We got to do better. I get on here every Thursday and I say, we got to do better. And I give you the history behind it because I feel we need to do better. I wrote this book because I feel we need to know better. We're running around telling ourselves lies about our history. The revisionism is so strong that many of us don't even ask where the information comes from anymore. We just respond. I had a friend who told me that the Haitians, all Haitians are nothing but devil worshipers. And then he went on to make statements that made me realize I had to ask him, do you not believe that Haitians are black? Do you not know the connection between Haitian people and you? Do you not remember or realize what the triangle slave trade was? And that there are more people who were dropped off in South America than came to the Americas. And that the blood that is shared down there is the same blood as yours. As an African American, pulled off the shores, out of Africa, brought across seas, and if your ancestors survived, you are connected. And do you not realize the hatred that America still has for Haitians historically? Robert D. Gregory once said that racism has a long history. When the Haitian Revolution happened, America wanted to ignore it. They wanted to pretend that it never happened. They didn't want the slaves to know that Haiti had thrown off the bonds of oppression from the French. And they went so far as to ignore it, to lie about it. When our country was born in the late 1700s, it was born with the idea of keeping slavery. The Haitian Revolution took a couple of years, but it threw off. It was successful. It was so successful that Napoleon decided it was not within his best interest to even continue war with this small island over in the Americas. And so when they threw off the bonds in 1804, that was something that had not been done since the beginning of the slave trade, since the beginning of the age of discovery. People who had been enslaved threw off their bonds. And this was important. And they were recognized as their own nation. Black people. And in that time, from that time, throughout South America, bonds and fights for the Spanish, for old world empires, chains were being thrown off. when we couldn't get our chains thrown off here in the Americas. They were fighting. They don't love Haitians like that. They empowered a savage named Papa Doc for decades to harm the Haitian people. America paid Papa Doc to oppress his own people in Haiti. Read your history. And he did it under the guise of witchcraft and voodoo. He co-opted their beliefs to make it evil. So when you call these people evil and you don't know what they've lived through, what their ancestors, what their uncles, grandparents, what they aunties, what they've lived through, and they come to America seeking asylum legally to be here, and they look at you, cousin, and you side and say they are nothing but a bunch of devil worshipers and losers. Who are we? But I guarantee you, none of you who are on here tonight can tell me a time that somebody pulled up a history book and taught you the history of Haiti. One of the greatest feats in the modern historical time of slaves fighting against their owners and throwing off. Let's remember, Napoleon had the strongest military in the world at the time. But you're not taught that. And so it's so easy to degrade them, to call them less than, to disassociate yourself from them. I told you all recently, I'm going to really start spending time talking about the African and the Latinx connection. It's time that we start understanding there's more that connects us than separates us. While we all doing this crab in the barrel, I want to hurt you, you trying to take from me, I can't get a black job, he taking my job. And you're not remembering, you're not understanding, you're not rationalizing or getting into your mind that you are more connected than you are separate. I can't say that more than that. You are more connected than you are separate. We don't teach the history that we should. I completely give that to you. But I remember, as I talked about a couple of weeks ago, that Jose Maria Morelos, he was a leader of the Mexican War of Independence, wrote to James Madison, the man who is the constructor of the Constitution of the United States. And he wrote to him and he said, we should have a birth of freedom in this part of the world. Morelos understood what it meant to be a slave. Morelos welcomed slaves from the Americas down into Mexico. And many of them escaped and went. When we look at our wars, our Seminole Wars that we don't talk about, teach either. And there's a reason we don't teach about the Seminole Wars. We understand that the Seminole Wars really were a war to protect American slave owners, the property of slaves, from being able to go down into the Americas and create a stronger nation, a free nation of people who understood their historical connections with each other better than we do today. It was a fear spoken by people in Congress, spoken by presidents, And the reason why they felt they had to go to war with Mexico to stop this expansion, to stop this ideal. I told you about John Quincy Adams. I'm going to say this because I see my time's running short. And how he was an advocate for killing off people until he realized that we are radicalizing and that we have more black people in this country, more slaves, by toward the end of his life than they ever had. And a lot of free nations south of America who were willing to work with those slaves because they shared blood. We've forgotten that. And I want you to consider that when you look at the migrants and you say, yeah, they should get out of here. The power within your communities to just reach out, start a business. Some of those people came here with skills. Start a construction business, start a landscaping business, employ them. Hey, you're stuck here. You're here with us until you get your citizenship. But can you get a work visa? Can we start something together? And I guarantee you, the socio-political, racist, imperialistic morons who keep sending migrants all over the country without care of their families or their kids will stop doing that when they see the power within your community that you create. That is what Jose Maria Morelos talked about in 1815. That is why we are not taught this history. I'm going to get out of here. I hope any of you who watch this later, watch the program later, hope you get something from it. Please share. Please share. I know I didn't click on a lot of you guys' responses, but I appreciate you being here. Appreciate you, Mike. Appreciate you, Bobby. I saw you, Tina. Prioritization of history is important, ladies and gentlemen. It's important. I'm not threatening you. I'm telling you that it's going to change your life, but what it will do is it will inform your future. Invest in it. Learn it. And I guarantee you, you will be able to qualify things better. Just as you use your Bible, God gave us a plethora of knowledge here in this world. We have so much knowledge. It's only up to us to use it. One of the things with my book that I tried so hard to do, it took me the longest time to do, was to go in and make sure I put every source that I could. I didn't do that for me. I know these books and I have these books and I've read this material. I did that for the reader because I felt that if the reader had all of this source material, right, they could be informed. And when they sat on programs with me or they watch something, they can go, wait a minute. I know I read something. I read an article. I read a study. I read a book. I did something. And I realized that what this person just said is wrong. It's revisionist. It's biased on its face. That's why. Inform yourself. There are people out here right now pretending to be historians, pretending to know something, and will never give you a place to go, a source, a fact, primary, secondary, tertiary. They will never tell you where they got that thought from. And if you listen to them close enough, you'll realize either they got it from somebody who didn't know what they were talking about, or they pulled it from somewhere off of themselves, just to sound like they knew what they were talking about. I decided to write books because I have to validate to you, to the people out here, that I'm not just going to say anything to you. I want you to get the book. I want you to look through it and say, well, why did Eddie say this? Oh, and I try my best to get primary source, primary meaning from the person who lived it, whether it be ancient text, whether it be archaeological information, artifacts. That's what we do here. All right, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to get out of here. Thank you for being with us tonight. I hope you got something from the program. I hope you share. I hope you grow. Um, and one of the things that I really, really, really hope is that you start to prioritize your history. Please feel free, just as that preacher did and many others, send in your questions. I'm not here to embarrass you. I'm going to respond to you in the best, most factual way that I can. And I'm always going to give you somewhere to go to grow your knowledge. Always. Because I think that there's nothing more important than that. And in keeping with that, I think what I forgot to do is I'm going to drop. I think I have about 2 books that particularly speak to the Muslim influence in early Africa. And I'm going to definitely make sure that I get that in here, drop that in here for you all. And you'll see it on our Erudition Network page since I've run out of time. But I thank you. Appreciate your responses tonight. And I encourage you to join us again, God willing, next Thursday when I will be on and we could talk a little bit more about history. Send in your questions, thoughts ahead of time, and maybe we'll talk about something that you sent me. But definitely, if not, you can always come on and ask the question live, and I guarantee you we will talk about it. But until then, you all be blessed, and we shall see you next time. Thank you.